At the pinnacle of his power, a man risks losing control. The world is not kind, so its kings become cruel. Murder is never mercy, it's never noble, and it's never redeemable. To the maniac, murder is an art form.
What is happening? For God's sake, answer me.
And welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. This is going to be a darker episode than normal, and it's only going to get darker from here. I'm currently operating on a generator with an extension cord. So this broadcast, although it's not going to go anywhere because my internet is actually strong, is going to look a little bit different as I may be completely enveloped by shadow by the end of this broadcast. But that's okay, because I have someone to usher in the light in as my guest today, and that is author, editor, and publishing icon, which I'm sure she's going to rebuke me on, Miss Hildy Silverman. Now, Hildy is on the other side of the state, I believe, so the lighted side of the state.
Yeah, although you can't really tell from my background here. It is my apartment, unfortunately, doesn't have great lighting for nighttime, so it looks darker than it is, but I got lucky. I didn't lose power.
You got me beat, at least for tonight.
Yeah.
So the best way I can introduce you is actually, if there was ever a point with any of our viewers where they were walking through Borders or a Barnes and Noble, for about 12 years, you walked through and you looked in the magazine rack. There was a magazine that was consistently there, except when it was sold out. It was one of the last remaining genre fiction magazines on the rack, and it had a long and storied history. It's called Space and Time magazine. And the person most keenly responsible for keeping it alive for 12 years is the person you're seeing to my right. Hildy did more than just curate a magazine, however, because as we'll talk, you'll start to understand that the magazine business is probably a little bit different than most people think of it as. And I'm sure as a little girl, she didn't look into a mirror and say, someday I'm going to spend 48 hours inside 24 hours going through a slush pile. I'm sure she didn't think that it was going to be cool to read 17 stories on the same weekend, all with the same basic plot, using the same elements that had been in the same news broadcast. But she endured, and she brought us a product and a magazine that trailed just blazed an incredible trail for a long stay. And while all good things must come to an end, that's not true of Hildy's future, because as a short story writer, she continues to impress with some incredibly dark-tinged science fiction and fantasy stories, as well as the occasional outright horror piece. So what do you disagree with besides the publishing icon thing?
Yeah, icon might be a little bit much, although I appreciate it. It's very kind. No, I mean, you're correct. Everything's going now. I should clarify that Space and Time still exists and is going very well under the new publisher that I was fortunate enough to be able to sell it to, Angela Yuriko Smith, who actually has turned it into a family business along with her daughter, her husband. So Space and Time continues running. It is still out there, which makes me very happy. And I know it makes the founder very happy, Gordon Linsner, to know his baby is still going after we're up to about 54 years now.
So we finally found something on this show older than I am.
It happens, right?
That's the most exciting part of this. So, but think about that for a moment. 50 plus years of any periodical, especially a fiction magazine on the rack. Weird Tales doesn't have any consistent 50-year run.
Not consistently, no. I think
Oh.
they've stopped and started a few times.
Yeah. Oh, many times. But
Yeah.
I think your only competition is things like Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, maybe Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, things like that for long run in the fiction category. Because it seems like in the 90s, this weird little thing happened where people stopped reading short stories, or at least stopped paying for them.
Yeah, there was definitely a slow. I mean, I think the big guys, Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction and Asimov's and, the analogs, the usual suspects, still had their audiences and did just fine. But yeah, there was definitely a slowdown with periodicals. I don't know if it was so much from the reader's interest as the way they were put out and circulated, and the changes with bookstores and borders going down. There weren't as many outlets. The smaller bookstores for a long time, they had folded against the big box. So there just weren't as many places putting out print. And of course, the cost of putting out print was very prohibitive, and it only got worse over time. So to have an actual magazine with print and covers and pages, and it became a very expensive proposition.
You would think that we were producing tablets or Sanskrit or something, but yeah, no, I mean the whole business definitely changed in that time. But by the early 2000s and the death of Borders as a bookstore and many localized chains as well as independent booksellers, definitely from the outside in, really, it probably looked like things were collapsing. How? Yeah. I mean, we're jumping ahead, but I don't mind. We'll go backwards in a bit. How did you personally weather that storm? It must have been challenging on a personal level, not even talking about the stories or the magazine, but just knowing the kind of uphill battle that you were fighting.
Yeah, it was a challenge. And one of the disappointments, one of my significant disappointments with Space and Time, is that because the costs kept going up, I was never able to take it beyond a penny per word magazine. I could not afford to pay more, because unlike some other magazines, I literally owned it. Like, I was the publisher. Right. There was no one behind me. There was no money behind me except my own, so as the cost of running print copies and the cost of paper and such would go up, every time I thought I could make some leeway and start paying a little more, it couldn't happen, or I couldn't have produced. I could have gone to 100% online, but at the time, perhaps because a lot of our audience was older, we really had a lot of people who wanted it in print. A lot of our audience wanted something they could hold in their hands. So I stuck with it, for better or worse, until I really couldn't anymore. But I did things to make it more affordable. I adjusted the paper type I used, all these little tweaks you make to try to afford things. I stopped sending distribution over into Europe because that became prohibitive. The cost of shipping, it just wasn't worth it. All those things just to keep it going.
And it's interesting because in the genres in general, science fiction was more resilient, I think, probably than fantasy or horror in general. It might not have been your experience, but even there, it almost got to a point of ghettoization, like it was before the 50s. In that it was like a small genre that was attracting a small set of readers. Now, they might have been very passionate, but it was a weird moment for periodicals and anthologies, because they were all targeting the same audience of whatever remained on the bookshelves to buy. It was definitely a time when novels were doing better than they'd been doing, although that shortly would end. But it seems like the short story itself as a form was shrinking. And that's really troubling, considering we always talk about the fact that we have kind of a short attention span as a society. So you'd think the short story would be out of control popular. Hildy, did you freeze? I think I'm going to try something, guys, to try and bring her back. Well, Hildy has frozen. Let me see about just letting her know that she should go all the way out and back in. Give me a moment, folks. Oh, maybe it's me. In the chat, can you do me a favor and let me know what you're seeing on screen right now? Let me see if we can get Hildy back in here. Okay, well, apparently Hildy's internet crashed, so the calamity on my side of the state has finally reached her. She's going to try and get back to us. We'll see what happens. Oh, we may have her back.
Hi, can you hear me?
Do we have you back?
I think so. I am so sorry. It's my apartment building. The internet just went out for no particular reason. I'm sorry.
The shockwave from my part of the state just finally hit you.
Maybe.
That's what happened there.
I'm really sorry. I hope that doesn't happen again.
Well, we'll struggle through tonight. There's a lot in the air, and if you're not from this part of the country, or if you're from overseas, like T-Bob79 is, who's watching us from the UK after 1 a.m. in the morning, all I'd say is we went through a major event that, because it seems like the news media was already preoccupied with the news of the day, I don't think anyone really saw the extent of what we got hit with. I don't think a lot of people did much. I wrapped my garden, but I still lost some sunflowers, so everyone can mourn my sunflowers.
No.
The pumpkins are still okay.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's important, right?
Yeah, probably.
Well, the sunflowers are kind of that too, but but we got hit with this big storm, and it's a ridiculous amount of people that are out of power or out of telecommunication wire. It's amazing, the trees that are down everywhere. I'm
sorry, I was mentioned that there's another storm coming in, so that might be part of the issue. I don't know.
Yeah, well, if we do lose you again, what we'll do is we'll figure out another time to bring you back on, because playing tag all night is not going to make a lot of sense either. But so let's just back up. And I said what you didn't want as a young girl looking in a mirror for your future, but what did you want?
What did I want? I think probably from the earliest age, I wanted to be a writer. I figured it out. I was actually, as a vivid memory, I was in first grade, I think, and we got an assignment to put together a little book of our own, our first little book. We took paper and folded it, and we had to write a story and illustrate it. Mine was profoundly labeled "A Boy and His Dog," about a boy and his dog. And I loved doing it, and I learned about, that's what writers do. They make up stories and put it on paper, and they read it to other people, and other people read it. And I was just hooked from then on. And I very quickly became interested in genre fiction as a reader. That's what really caught my attention and what I enjoyed reading the most. And it just went on from there. So, yep.
So who are those early writers that caught your interest?
Chronicles of Prydain were early on. Lloyd Alexander's series really wowed me. Early on, let's see, the Matheson's short story collections. That's what turned me on to short fiction. The Shock 1, Shock 2, Shock 3, and Shock Waves, those anthologies. I blew my mind. I love the short, tight, someone who could get across so much in so few words. I love that. That was a big one. When I was a little bit older, I went through a period where I was really into hard sci-fi. I was reading like Ben Bova, things like that. I read the Heinlein juveniles and beyond. And then found horror and King and, all the usual suspects there. So it was all kinds of genre fiction, but that element, that fantasy element, that unreal element, that's the thing that got me.
Well, I think King is probably the most general stepping stone for so many of us of our age group. And I mean, the other name I always bring up is Charles L. Grant's Shadows anthologies, which were just, I cannot even discuss how important they were to me, because you heard a bunch of different voices and they were all doing different things. And every single story seemed to be taking you somewhere you couldn't be. And every story is tending to make you feel something that you had never felt before. Maybe it was my age, but I don't think so. I think there was an explosion of talent coming out of the late 60s, early 70s, and riding right through about the mid 80s of these really, really transformative writers who are taking genre fiction out of the castles or out of the spaceship, as it were, and into a million different directions. An extremely, extremely industrious period. And the interesting thing is, the name of the magazine that you eventually would own directly references that in its own way. Because by being such a broad title, you were able to fit in so many types of fiction.
Yeah.
So how did you decide what that balance was like for the magazine?
Well, what I tried to do with the magazine is not just bring in, here's a horror story, here's a fantasy story, here's a science fiction story. I wanted blends. I thought that was a niche that you couldn't find everywhere. A lot of magazines wanted something very pure to fit. So if they were a science fiction magazine, they wanted science fiction. There's no question this is science fiction, or there's no question this is fantasy. I loved finding stories that would blend horror with science fiction, or fantasy with, horror, or steampunk with science fiction, whatever wacky blends we could come up with. Mash them all together as much as possible. That was something that I really loved, finding those stories where people could bring in all those elements and make them really work together. Humor and horror is one of the things I always have enjoyed a lot too.
It's one of the tougher things to do in the genre, because so you could say that horror is subjective to a certain degree, but I think there's certain universal truths that there's certain. I don't think anyone is exactly comfortable with surgery without anesthetic. Right. So there's certain things that you can pretty universally say that's going to make people uncomfortable. Humor doesn't really work that way. Although the mechanics of telling the stories are similar, there's still setups and punchlines. You have to understand your audience, and then you have to be very precise with humor. So I've always been afraid to write humor because A, I don't think I'm funny, and B, I see it as like something you could devote an entire career just to figure out how to deliver a punchline.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Humor is subjective too, to some degree, but some writers, you can see them try very hard to be funny, and they're usually not. For others, it's just effortless. They just are naturally, the way they string together the words, it's just humorous. It's just funny. It makes you laugh out loud. So there's definitely a certain talent for it, a certain, I don't know, I just a sense of timing, a sense of where to insert the humor in your story. If you can ruin a story by putting humor where it just doesn't belong. This is not the moment for it. And you can save a story by throwing it in at just a precise time. So I'm always impressed by authors who can really pull that off.
I can't. So
Fair.
you got to know what you do.
Exactly.
So let's talk slush piles for a moment, because I just want to talk about that title, the name slush pile, because it's funny enough as is.
Yeah.
So for the viewers that are not aware, a slush pile is just the pile of manuscripts that come in. They used to come in physically on paper and sit on a desk until they're opened, and some poor sap has to read through all of them. Now, Space and Time had first readers that weeded out some of the real shaft, right?
Yes. Actually, it had. I was very fortunate in that I had. I think at the most I had 6 first readers, plus I had a fiction editor, Gerard Horner, who is a horror icon himself, someone who is a fabulous writer and editor and such. And it was the fiction editor. I believe he's still with the magazine. So that was a tremendous help. I chose, though, to read every story before it went in. So I didn't have to go through the complete slush pile, that was weeded out and such. By the time it got to me, it was already probably going to be published. Almost, I'd say 99% of the time. If Gerard passed it up to me, it was ready to go. So I was spared the depths of the slush pile. That said, every so often somebody would try to slide something to me, avoiding the usual course.
Really?
They try to skip the first reader. They try to skip the editor, thinking, well, I may as well go to a source. They would track down my email and try to send it directly. Typically, I would just write back and say, no, that's not how we do this.
Because no one's ever thought of that before.
Right. And if you said yes to one, you'd be in trouble.
Oh my God! So, yeah. So I remember all this. I'm a big skeptic when it comes to reading books about the whole business, because frankly, look at the titles of the people that are writing the bylines of the people who are writing these books, and you're like, I've never heard of this person, and wouldn't I have if they knew anything about getting published? But the one thing they always told you is try and find an editor's name and address it directly to the editor, and I always found it to be like oddly insulting, because my feelings was always, if I wrote something and it was really good and it was going to compete on its own, didn't matter who saw it. Really didn't. I mean, if you knew the editor, I guess maybe it made sense to do some kind of introduction, but I had the shortest cover letter ever. It would be like, please find my short story, whatever the title was. It runs about 22. It runs about 5,000 words and has not been previously published. Look forward to hearing from you. Period. Because I was always like just completely cynical about the whole process of trying to sell myself. It's like, if I go to this grocery store, you can buy cornflakes or you can buy the store brand cornflakes, right? I was the store brand cornflakes for that's who I was, because I wasn't a name recognized. So I had to be as good as the Kellogg's if I wanted a chance. That's where it had to start. But it seems like there was always people trying to jump to find that shortcut to buy a drink at a convention, or and none of that made sense to me. Did it ever make sense to you? Did any of that ever work?
No, not if I didn't know the person personally. It was different because I was also a writer and I was involved in the community. There were some people that I knew directly. If they felt they had a great story, they didn't have a home for it, I would probably, I'd take a look directly. But I wouldn't make the decision on my own, because that would put me in a really awkward position with friends. Right. So I would say, you can hand it to me, but I would give it to Gerard to read and to say, okay, do you agree that this is good enough to go in? We didn't say yes to everybody, I'll tell you that, which, some people took better than others.
No dirty laundry on the show, but
no, I'm not gonna say who.
Just saying broadly. I'll use a ridiculous example, right? So if Peter Straub wants to go through the process, he obviously does, because he's earned a certain stature. There's nothing wrong with that. You have a magazine to sell.
Right.
The other thing I never understood is the people who didn't understand the business of it. Like, oh, but I think I wrote a better short story than anything that made it in. Well, first off, of course you do. But beyond that, you do realize that a certain amount of name recognition for at least one name on that cover is kind of important. You need to sell copies or else no one's going to read your precious short story if it does get in the magazine.
Well, absolutely. And, again, my magazine was a penny per word production. We weren't going to, in reality, always attract the top names, which I totally understand. That said, sometimes a top name would come to me. And if you look back at some back issues, you'll see who I'm talking about. Some major people said, hey, I've got a story. I couldn't really find a place to fit it because it doesn't fit the niche that people expect from me. I always write science fiction. This is fantasy. Or I always write fantasy. This is horror. Would you be interested? Now, I don't think I ever said a no to that. If that name was that big and they weren't writing anything, it's not like they handed me junk. I was never handed a story by a named person that I'd be ashamed to publish just because their name was on it. They're still them. They had that talent. It was just a story I couldn't find a home.
Yeah, that's the other thing is it's always easy to think everything's a conspiracy, but there's a reason the big names are the big names. They learned some craft along the way. Now,
right.
I will admit, sometimes I look at certain people and I go, I don't get it. It's not my thing. But that's regardless. The business side of it is the business side of it. Just for just transparency, I don't believe I ever actually submitted to Space and Time. So I don't think we have any conflicts whatsoever. I have known Hildy for many, many years, but purely socially.
Yep.
And they're picking on my sunflowers in the chat. I just want you to know.
Oh,
it's not right, man.
For shame.
It's not right. A little piece of Halloween died with each sunflower. You don't want that on your head.
No.
So let's talk about your fiction for a moment, because that's what you said you wanted growing up. You wanted to be a writer, and you have published short stories, mainly in anthologies, and in a variety of genres as well. So that kind of neatly dovetails into your choices as an editor. Is there a genre you prefer to write in?
More than any other? Not really. I'm pretty balanced. I guess more of my stories tend to be some form of fantasy, urban fantasy, or some kind of a fantasy element. I love horror. I love writing horror. I haven't written that much of it. I'm starting to write more of it as I get older, interestingly. I've done a little science fiction, and I've did some steampunk and a couple other things. And I've done lots of blends. I've done humorous fantasy. I did a few of those with Esther Friesner for her anthologies. They were a lot of fun. But yeah, I do enjoy writing for themed anthologies because I take them. It's almost like an individual writing challenge every time. Like, okay, the story has to fit this theme. Now come up with something. It's like getting a little challenge all the time.
100% agree, because you know what it forces you to do? Right.
Yep.
It's too easy to see in the listing for an anthology that's reading and say, well, what did I have that might fit that? And the worst temptation ever is to revise something into an anthology. It never works, and the editors can always tell.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that if you don't write, you'll never get is the forum rejection letter. It speaks volumes, especially if you've sold some stories. If you've never sold a story, then it's what you're going to get, pretty much, unless you get something nice. But if you have any kind of name recognition out there, at a certain point, when you're getting more forum letters, you're doing something structurally wrong with your career.
Yeah.
Because editors are real people. They want to network back with you. They say, I can't use this story. But you know what? I'd love to have something from her down the road. So it pays them to write that one line email if there was anything there worth saving. and they're still picking on my sunflowers.
Well, I'll mention, because you brought this up, actually one of the reasons I was able to get started in my career, as far as writing goes, was because an editor took the time to say, hey, this thing you submitted to my anthology wasn't quite right. I feel like something is there. I'm going to be having some more. Please submit again. And I submitted again and again until I hit the sweet spot. He had the right anthology, I had the right story, and that was my first publication. And it's because he took the time and saw something that interested him, that gave me that opening and got me started. And that's John Ordover, by the way. I should shout out his name because I owe a lot of my career to him. He really got me started. He was my first professional publication. John used to be the editor for the Star Trek tie-ins, amongst other things.
Was that no, I'm going to embarrass myself if I try and remember. For some reason, I want to think that was with the Avon years for Star Trek, but I'm probably wrong.
Yeah, you know what? I should remember, because I should remember, and I don't. I was with a P, but I'm thinking Paramount, which is not correct. Paramount licensed the tie-ins to, and he was the editor-in-chief for those. But this was actually not a Star Trek anthology. He was doing another anthology, which was kind of fun. It was a time travel one. And that's what I bought the story for. And that kind of opened everything up for me.
So you've actually written in established universes, sort of. So you've done your Holmes and Watson story.
Yes,
that
a couple of those.
Yeah, that appeared in Baker Street Irregulars is the one I in particular am aware of. So I've done a little bit of work in that world too. It's interesting because my take is this. I don't think Doyle was actually that great of a writer as far as prose goes. It was just that the characters and the setting endured so well that the stories in our heads are actually better than what's on the page. Would you agree with that?
I actually do agree with that, yes. He created just this fascinating character and this dynamic that I'd say surpassed the actual writing of it, and has captured so many generations. I mean, look how far it's come, and now that it's in the public domain, how many anthologies and whole novel riffs on it are out there. That's an amazing and enduring character, and a lot of fun to play with in different universes.
Yeah, but you know what I discovered when I did it? If you kill off an evergreen character, they get very upset about what that does to continuity.
Uh-oh. Oh, who'd you kill?
I called Mycroft.
For shame. For shame.
No, but it became the entire emotional arc of the thing. It made sense. Because there's that whole jealousy, because Mycroft was supposedly the smarter of the two, which, you see, if you're not actually Holmes reader, you guys don't have any idea. If you just have seen the Cushing movies, you know. So I want to give you an example here. Let's see. This is what I'm dealing with here.
Wow.
And I'm never mentioning my gardening skills again. Although if anyone wants cucumbers, I'm like overgrown with them. So,
ooh, that sounds good.
Well, if you eat salted cucumbers every day to try and actually use through the supply, and I can't stand pickles, so that ain't happening.
Oh no.
But actually, he follows that up with a legit question: are these stories available online?
I'm pretty sure several of the anthologies, yeah, they are online. There are ebooks of them now. Baker Street Irregulars for sure. There were two of them: Baker Street Irregulars, the first one, and then Baker Street Irregulars 2, The Games Afoot. Those I'm certain have ebooks. Almost everything I think at this point that I've written for has an online version.
So you also, your career as an editor actually kind of perfectly lines up with the evolution of the ebook into a viable format. So, yeah. I mean, because we both are old enough to remember when ebooks were on floppy disks and no one would go near them. For good reason, by the way, because it was not a pleasant reading experience. But it's interesting because I think if we had this same conversation 5 years ago, we'd be talking about the day when Kindle took over everything.
Oh, God,
And,
yes.
and it seems to have leveled off and is actually maybe even receding at this point. We're discovering that people don't necessarily replace devices, which is interesting. What do you see for the future? Do you think print is going to recover its ground that it lost in the short term, or do you think the ebook thing is going to? What percentage of the business do you think it will level out to?
Oh, gosh. I would not even venture a guess. I think there will always be some market for paper. There's always a market for people who want to hold it in their hands. They want to bring it somewhere to be signed. And yes, I know you can sign electronically. That's
No,
not the same
you
thing.
can't.
Not well. So I don't think paper's going anywhere per se. Percentage-wise, though, I mean, to read e-readers, or just read off your phone, read off an iPad or whatever. It's so ubiquitous. It's so easy now. I've got to think it's just going to keep going and going and growing. Yeah, I couldn't venture to give you numbers, particularly now with everything that's changed. This pandemic has hit publishing very hard.
What? There's what pandemic?
I know, yeah. I've heard rumors of this, yeah.
Whispers.
Yeah, if you look at any forums or anyone talking about publishing, this is a big, unexpected blow on top of other blows they've suffered.
Oh, yeah.
So who knows how that's going to affect anything? Who's going to survive? What outlets are going to survive as far as brick and mortar? I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, the last major book chain, Barnes and Noble. Don't give me that Maximilian books in the chat. Don't do it. Barnes and Noble have had a shifting pattern to try and survive over the years, and they've been counted out a lot of times. But now they're talking about getting rid of the magazine section, basically, just having 3 end caps with, basically the top magazines on them. They got rid of their media sections, basically, except for vinyl.
Yeah.
Which at one point was keeping them alive. So it's a shifting sand. Can you survive on statues, toys, and anime figures? I don't know. Funko Pops can't run the world, that's for sure. They're not their own economy, contrary to belief.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Even while I was still publishing for the good last 8 years I was in publishing, they were saying, oh, Barnes & Noble's about to go down. Barnes & Noble's about to go down. And that was my main outlet for on the shelf. So that was a concern. Not going down yet, but it's certainly changing and contracting. And to get in there if you're new is almost impossible. And to stay in there and get publicized is expensive. And, it's tricky.
I think their footprint has to shrink. I mean, per store. I think they're paying a lot of rent for those buildings.
Well, yeah.
I think that day of the big box bookstore, I just can't see a future for it. Ironically, the Walden Books method might end up being what would actually work today. Not in malls, but in strip centers, maybe.
Well, what's interesting, and we've been seeing this for a few years now, again, before the whole world fell apart, but there was a resurgence of the mom and pops, of the smaller stores, the individual outlets, which was kind of heartening and kind of nice to see. Will they continue as small businesses now that this has happened? I hope so. I hope they can survive. But it seemed like almost, it was kind of cyclical. You had all the little individual stores. You had Walden Books in the malls, and you had the mom and pops and the smaller ones. Then Borders arose, and then Barnes and Noble arose, and all of those died out. And now Borders is gone, and Barnes and Noble's shaky, and you start seeing them pop up again in towns and such, just strip malls. Suddenly there's a nice individual little bookstore. So who knows? Maybe that'll save us.
Well, that's assuming that there's a saving to be done.
Hmm.
So,
There's a fan.
Yeah, so Les Cunningham, this is Mr. Tim. Tim is a big consumer of books, especially small press books. So shout out to Tim. He's saying print all day long. Jamie is also saying, I still buy print and will continue to buy print until I no longer can do so. I'm not sure if she means whether she's going to hold out or the industry will, but I'm hoping both do. I don't own a e-reader of any sort. And I know I've missed out on stuff from that, by the way. It's not a perfect arrangement, but to me, a book is a book. And I think when we start redefining that, we're going to get into the same problem that so many other industries have gotten when they've tried to change the primary product. You can have spin-offs, but if, for instance, you can have a million flavors of Mountain Dew, but at some point, there has to be Mountain Dew. So I think there has to still be books. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily mass market paperbacks, which seem to be trying to come back now after hitting a horrific low point.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't mean trade paperbacks necessarily, although, Amazon has a vested interest, I think, in that. Hardcovers, who knows? I was just talking a week ago. Was it a week? Yeah, I had Jeff Strand on the show, and we were talking about limiteds, and he still sells limited. He still does, but the numbers have decreased of what gets even printed as those, extreme quality, high quality, offset bound, beautiful leather editions. Although I will say, and I'll just say this for the millionth time on the show, but the first time someone wants to tray case anything I have anything to do with, they're getting slapped. Don't sell a box, sell a book. Come on, people. But it seems like we have to somehow get a new generation of readers involved. And it doesn't have to be a generation like young people necessarily. That's not how I mean generation. It just has to be another large group, another big influx. And we can't wait for another Twilight influx or another 50 Shades. It has to be an organic thing that's interested in more than one series, one title, or one movie adaptation series. How do you think we go about that? How do we get the new readers involved?
Well, I feel like, and I have a kid who's 23, so maybe slightly older than you're thinking of, but I know their generation, they were reading quite a lot. And even before Twilight, there were a lot of readers. And interestingly, they wanted paper. They wanted the prestige of carrying that book to school and showing people they had the book, which I was fascinated by. Now, the next generation down, I'm not sure. I'm not as in touch with that because I don't have a child that age. I think if you put out interesting books and you market them properly, the other hat I wear in life is in marketing, so I'm always thinking of that, my other profession. Reach out on the platforms that they're on and tell them and make sure they know about authors that are interesting and have stories that are interesting. I think they'll come. I hope they'll come. I don't think reading is dead by any means. You got to tap into that market. There's a lot of YA out there. The YA section is still one of the biggest ones at a bookstore. So there's obviously a passion for it. There's obviously people reading a lot of different series, not just one. And they're the right age group to keep it going. So just keep putting all that good stuff out there.
No one wants me to write any young adult. I'm telling you that right now.
Oh, are you sure?
I'm very sure. There are laws and stuff. So I think what's interesting is that, and again, this is something that Jeff and I were speaking about, is that books have become more readily accessible to the television and movie audience in their subject and even in their presentation. You can write a zombie novel today or a slasher novel today, and it has an audience. 25 years ago, you'd be laughed at for trying to do that. But interestingly, on the film side, the same thing has happened in reverse, which is now you have things like Hereditary and The Witch and Lighthouse come out, which are extremely literate horror films, which used to be a really narrow category, unless it was actually an adaptation of a book. It was very rare that they shot shot for the stars like that. Do you think that's part of our future too? That bridging the mediums?
Oh, absolutely. I think the success of Hereditary and The Witch and like so many thinking person's horror that isn't spoon fed and obvious. Although there's still a place for that too. But I think the success of those, the commercial success of those, is going to keep them coming. And I'm thrilled myself because I think we're going to continue seeing a lot of material adapted for screen that maybe wouldn't have gotten a chance in the past. Some more literary, for lack of a better word, horror. Harder to film things that people would read and say, there's no way they could ever make a movie of that. How will that work? But now they can, because they see, there's an interest. They're ready for that. They want something different. They want something that doesn't necessarily connect all the dots they expect, that does something different, that makes you really think and makes you internalize and figure out what was going on. And maybe your interpretation is different than 10 other people's interpretation. I think I hope we'll continue to see more of that. Judging by people you and I both know who are starting to see things getting optioned. I think it's on a good path because there's some great stuff coming out.
There is, and one of those is, which neither of us can discuss yet, but one of those is a dream thing for me that I've always wanted to see on the screen. So I hope you're right. I'm always a cynic and I'm always a skeptic. So we'll see. But I will say that, at the point where Dan Simmons' The Terror got adapted, although imperfectly, maybe we're looking at Hollywood taking a look at, people who actually write like words and maybe full sentences for once, rather than just screenwriters, which I'm not picking on screenwriters. What I think, unfortunately, screenwriters are what you hire when you want to make a Transformers movie.
Yeah, unless you have a screenwriter who is also who's done both.
Yeah, that was a horrible generalization, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's so many good things. I'm thinking of the Ari Aster movie, Midsummer.
Mm-hmm.
There's just been, I feel like horror is in this great renaissance because they're taking chances on more risky movies and television shows that they don't just fit neatly into what people expect. Oh, this is horror, therefore there's, this vampire and there's this obvious thing, slasher. Yeah. These obvious things. No, horror can be much more subtle. It can be, never defined on the screen and still make you feel those feelings and feel that disturbance. It's exciting to see. I hope, I hope it continues, like I said.
Have you seen Relic?
I have not yet. I popped up on my screen as a recommended. Is it good?
It's the best film of this year, and I don't think that's going to change.
Okay,
it is amazing film. And you know how any truly great horror film, it's a great horror film. People will start debating immediately whether it's a horror film. That seems to be how it goes. Because whether it's Jaws or The Shining, someone is going to try and throw some different titling on it.
Right.
And this film has already been alive. Well, it's kind of a family drama. Yeah, so is like almost all horror, if you want to get down to it. Unless you're talking a group of kids in the hills, it's basically all some form of. Hereditary is a family drama.
Right.
I mean, it's about stakes. It's about connection. It's about character.
All right. But that's on my list then.
You have to make this happen like ridiculously soon.
Okay.
And then you got to tell me what you thought, because it's wonderful about messing you up in a very subtle way.
Cool.
So what about you and your future in writing? You're best known as, of course, a short story writer. Are we ever going to see a novel out of you?
So I wrote one full-length novel, and I didn't really go. I pitched it, actually. Publisher took a look at it, Lovely feedback, honestly, really nice feedback. It wasn't quite right for them. I need to revise it. It was written too long ago to fit what people are looking for now. I just have to sit my butt down and do something with it. But yeah, the long-winded version is that I would like to get an actual full-length book out there at some point. Just have to carve out the time and do it.
Yeah, well, it's that whole how do you eat a horse, right?
Yep.
One bite at a time. All right, let's see if there was any questions in the chat for you that I missed, because I probably did. Something that doesn't involve sunflowers.
I know nothing of growing things, so I can't help you with the
You know
sunflowers.
nothing of growing things?
Not of growing plants and stuff. I'm terrible. I kill every plant. I don't know why. Not good with it.
You need one of those succulents that you just put like an ice cube in once a week, and it does the rest all by itself.
That's
Doesn't
probably,
even want sun.
I might be able to do that. I might be able to keep that going.
Well, barring the horrific acts of vandalism from the deer and the occasional horrific storm, I'm okay with my garden. But it seems like every year there's at least one horrific incident. The year that the deer got inside and just decided to eat or trample everything it forced me to put up my garden is actually made of telephone poles. That's true.
Oh wow, that's clever.
Yeah. So you get them when they take them down from the road department, but I mean, they can't get in now. If they get in now, I'm going to keep it in there because it's never getting out. So it's going to be a pet deer at that point.
There you go, your own Bambi.
I don't think it'll be that happy back there. All right. So, Hildy, how do people keep in touch with what you've got going on and stay in touch with you?
Well, I have an Amazon page, author's page. I try to keep that up to date. I'm on social Twitter. My handle's Hildy at Hildy9595. I have a Facebook presence, although I kind of keep the Facebook to friends or people I know for the most part. But you can find me there. I'll put out information. But yeah, I'd say the author's page probably the most. I should really do something like a little website. Again, that's something I really should just sit down and do. Just haven't gotten around to it yet.
And do you see yourself ever getting back into the editing game?
Oh, well, I mean, I do on occasion dabble. If somebody needs help with a book or story they're working on, I'll do some reading and give them tips or whatever. Actually running a publication again, I don't think so. I loved it. It was a passion for a long time, but it is so time consuming, and it became almost impossible to do with the full-time day job and with my own writing. And I really would like to focus more on my own writing at this point.
You've earned it. You've definitely earned it. And for anyone out there who is thinking about going into this wild business of writing, besides telling them to pick a different field, what is your advice?
What's my advice? Read a lot in the genre, especially that you want to write in. Read the people who are acclaimed, as so you know who's doing it right and that what they're writing kind of deconstruct it after you read it and see, why did it make me feel this way? What did I enjoy about it? What didn't I enjoy about it? How did they use sentences? How did they create a character? How did they build up this world? What words did they use? Really get to know your stuff, and then just start, write what you love, write what you enjoy, put it out there. Know you're going to be rejected. Know you're going to always be rejected, no matter how much you do it. Everyone, that never stops. There will be rejections. Don't take it personally. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting your work for whatever reason. And it could be a million reasons. There were things I rejected, not because they were ill written, but because I'd gotten 10 versions of the same thing. So, there's only so many ways, so many stories about this kind of vampire that I could publish. So it probably had nothing to do with the writing, there's just, there's a million reasons you can be rejected. And just kind of, keep at it and don't let people tell you not to, because we get a lot of well-meaning people who tell us, you shouldn't, why are you wasting your time? You could be doing so many other things. It's so hard to do. You have to know people to get in. All these negatives we give people who want to write, especially young people, no, screw that. You want to write. Just do it.
Absolutely. Be your own cheerleader.
Yep.
Never stop. Never stop. Well, Jamie's comment is one that I think we'll leave it on. I'll tell people after I put it up here what's next on the show, and we'll take it out in a second. But Jamie says, it was always my dream to have my own library in my home. I made that happen, but it needs more books in it. Jamie, you'll always need more books. You're never going to escape the book problem. The problem is, of course, to be read piles. That's the problem.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah, because no matter who you are, if you actually have read everything you own, you're doing it wrong. So the show will be back on Saturday. I know this was a slightly abbreviated episode, but with internet connections being what they are, I don't think we should just really tempt fate too much. The show will be back on Saturday at 2 p.m. So if you're in Europe, this isn't a chance to actually watch it and not, miss work the next morning or sleep through breakfast. I will be joined by Danielle Trusani, who writes Dark Matters for the New York Times Book Review. And she's been a Pulitzer Prize jurist. So she brings lots of experience and acclaim that frankly has me a little bit intimidated. And but she specifically writes about and reviews the genre. So this is going to be an apples to apples journey, just on a different level than we perhaps are used to. So I will love to see. No, Tim, you do not want to see a young adult novel from me.
Clown in the sunflower field.
I don't even know where to go from that. I would never write an evil clown. No. Anyway, thank you all for joining. Please leave a message. The game show does return on Monday, and I still have a slot open if anyone wants to join in. If you think you have what it takes, it's going to be a cross-index of horror from the 60s through today. So if you want, just send me a message on any of the common ways, whether that's a comment below this video, on Twitter, an email directly to visitedbyvoices@gmail.com. And let me know you're interested, and I'll be back in touch with you. Have a great night, and have fun.
Looks like it just ruins everything.